It's very noticeable at the moment that public debates on lots of issues are very polarised. This is certainly the case when it comes to discussions about China. As geopolitical rivalries get more tense between China and liberal democracies, and between China and the United States in particular, public rhetoric about China gets more negative. We know this has been going on in British media coverage of China. I talked about that in a previous video. So if I happen to say something slightly negative about China in one of the videos on here, I can sort of understand why people might think that I'm just piling on and want to push back in the other direction. And I see this sometimes in the comments on this channel. But the trouble is, it then becomes very difficult to talk about things like the real challenges China is facing, and also it gets difficult to have a serious discussion about some of the really negative things going on in China at the moment. The China scholars Nicholas Loubere and Ivan Franceschini brought out a short book a while ago called Global China as Method that has what I think is a really great analysis of how this divided discourse on China very often works, both on the political right and on the political left. On the right, we have a way of talking about China which they call essentialism. Here's what they say about it. Essentialism is how these discourses often put the emphasis on some innate, essential characteristics of China and the Chinese. While in the past, similar discussions revolved around issues of race, today's essentialist arguments mostly center around the idea that authoritarian China cannot be compared with liberal democratic countries because they represent fundamentally different political systems. And any suggestion that there may be commonalities or overlaps is immediately and vociferously denounced. An essentialist framework is particularly common among those on the right who perceive China as an existential, communist and authoritarian threat to global capitalism and Western democracy that must be forcibly subordinated and integrated. From this perspective, there can be no linkages, seepages, or parallels between liberal democracies and authoritarian regimes. China must be analysed in isolation. So the essentialist discourse works by interpreting China through a lens of some innate, eternal, defective Chinese culture. For example, the rise of a supposedly all-powerful strongman leader like Xi Jinping must be because of China's history of all-powerful despotic emperors, which has somehow become a fixed part of Chinese cultural DNA. This doesn't leave any room for discussion of alternatives, such as, perhaps, that Xi Jinping's rise to the top of the Communist Party might have something to do with, say, the fact that China is currently facing a lot of social and economic dilemmas which might have led people to lend support to a particularly authoritarian form of leadership on the grounds that this man is going to sort everything out for us. After all, this does seem to be a broad political trend that we're currently seeing in other parts of the world as well. So it might actually have nothing to do with some innate Chinese characteristic. So that's the right. What about the left? The left falls into the trap of whataboutism. There's an inclination to want to defend any criticism of China whatsoever, not by talking about what's going on in China, but by pointing to the West, usually America. Here's what Loubere and Franceschini say about this. Whataboutism refers to the dismissal of any criticism of China as hypocritical. An instance of this perspective could be seen in 2020, when, as protests against police brutality and racism erupted in American cities, social media platforms were awash with voices pointing out the hypocrisy of the US government in condemning the actions of the Chinese authorities in Hong Kong. Unable to control social unrest at home, what right do US politicians have to comment on what is going on in the former British colony? Similarly, in stigmatizing the mass incarcerations of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, how could they ignore their own moral bankruptcy, made evident by the grim situation of the US prison system, the mass detention on the country's southern border, and the disasters unleashed by the global war on terror. This position is taken to extremes by some commentators. It gets to the point where China is all good because it's a rival of the imperialist United States. China is seen as some kind of socialist savior which is going to lead the world, or at least the global south, to the promised land of international socialist utopia, vanquishing the evil imperialist United States. So next time you see or hear someone on the TV or social media or wherever talking about China, listen out or look out for both of these, essentialism and whataboutism. You'll probably find them all over the place. So how do we, or should we, talk about China in a way which allows for serious discussion but without falling into either of these traps? I'll talk about that in another video, which hopefully will be out quite soon. Thank you for watching.